My brother's dojo was packed wall to wall that night, filled with rich local sponsors and our snooty parents, all of them hungry to watch me fall flat on my face. Brad swaggered onto the mat, straightening his brand new Taekwondo black belt like it was a royal crown. He thrust a contract at me and smirked. "Last 3 minutes against me on this mat, little sister, and I'll hand over the deed to Dad's old youth center. Lose, and you shut down your little charity project and get out of town for good." Our parents grinned from their seats, absolutely certain their perfect son was about to flatten his fragile little sister. What neither Brad nor my parents remembered was that while he'd spent 5 years collecting cushioned dojo trophies, I'd spent 8 years as a Marine captain running combat readiness training. I glanced at the paper, then back at his cocky grin, and quietly pulled my hair into a tie. My name is Claire Vance. I'm 36, and if life has taught me one thing, it's that arrogance blinds people to what's actually in front of them. Growing up, my brother Brad was the family's shining star. Our parents lavished him with praise, country club perks, and endless cash for every passing hobby, while I was supposed to stay quiet in his shadow. When I turned 18 and chose the Marine Corps over the fancy private college my parents had already picked out for me, they nearly cut me off entirely. In their eyes, I was an embarrassment who didn't fit the family image. Brad spent the following years living off Dad's money, eventually launching an upscale martial arts studio and showing off his freshly earned black belt every chance he got. I spent those same years overseas on deployment, climbing to the rank of captain, and learning what survival really means when it isn't a game. Years after leaving active duty, I came home determined to turn our family's abandoned community building into a nonprofit fitness and mentorship camp for local kids. But Brad had his eye on that same property, wanting it for his growing gym business. He figured he could push around, guilt trip, and threaten his supposedly fragile little sister until she gave up. He'd completely forgotten what kind of training goes into leading Marines through combat. It didn't take him long to turn the disagreement into a spectacle. Rather than just talking things over, he invited me to his studio's yearly charity gala, a glamorous black tie affair crawling with wealthy donors, city officials, and, naturally, our proud parents. I arrived in a simple blazer expecting a short chat in his office. Instead, Brad waited until the room was at capacity, walked to the center of the mat with a mic in hand, and called me out in front of everyone. With a smug grin that turned my stomach, he told the crowd his charity-obsessed sister was having trouble facing the truth. He said he wanted to settle our dispute the way real athletes would. In front of 50 influential guests and a couple of local news crews, Brad produced a folded legal document from his jacket. He announced that if I lasted just 3 minutes against him in an exhibition match, he'd sign the property over immediately. If I lost or refused to step on the mat at all, I'd have to sign away every claim to the land and leave town permanently. My parents sat front row, laughing quietly into their champagne glasses, savoring what they assumed would be my public humiliation. They expected tears, surrender, and a quick exit. What Brad never realized was that by putting his offer in writing, in front of dozens of witnesses and cameras, he'd handed me exactly the leverage I needed. What Brad never grasped was the enormous gap between sport fighting and actual combat. For 5 years, his entire fighting identity had been built around controlled point sparring. He dropped serious money on custom gear, spent his weekends chasing trophies under padded rules, and drilled flashy kicks meant purely for spectacle. In his world, every strike stopped at a whistle, every match had a referee, and nobody was ever truly trying to hurt him. His black belt was less a mark of skill and more an expensive prop, bought with Dad's wallet to feed his ego. My path looked nothing like his. During my 8 years in the Marines, hand-to-hand training wasn't about points or performing for a crowd. As a certified instructor under the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program, I trained for brutal, real-world, close-quarters survival. I spent years learning to disarm opponents, shut down threats in an instant, and keep my composure under real physical stress. I'd grappled with 200-pound infantrymen in full gear on mud-covered ground where losing focus meant losing the fight, and showing off got you carried away on a stretcher. Standing across from Brad and his wealthy crowd, I could see he had no clue who he was actually facing. To him, I was still the quiet kid who'd run off to join the military, not a trained Marine who could take apart his showy, hollow style in seconds. The room fell silent as I slipped off my shoes, set my blazer aside, and stepped onto the mat. Brad bounced on his heels, running through some rehearsed theatrical warm-up. In the front row, my father sipped his champagne and murmured something to my mother that made them both laugh softly. They were bracing for a quick, easy show, sure I'd crumble the second Brad made his move. 3 minutes, Claire, he taunted, grinning for the news camera. Try not to cry when you tap out. He didn't hesitate. The instant the match began, he lunged forward with a jumping, high-flying, roundhouse kick aimed at my head, a move built to impress his wealthy clientele and put me flat on the ground. He expected panic or a frozen deer in headlights reaction. Instead, my training took over without a single wasted thought. I stepped inside the arc of his kick, slipped beneath it, and used his own momentum against him with one controlled push of my forearm. He sailed past his target, twisted awkwardly midair, and hit the mat hard, the sound echoing through the stunned room. Every eye went wide. My father's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips, and Brad's grin evaporated as he scrambled up, struggling to catch his breath. The quiet didn't last. Humiliated and furious in front of his high-paying clients, Brad's face went crimson. All his polished form disappeared, replaced by a frustrated roar as he charged at me with a flurry of wild, undisciplined strikes aimed at my face. He was fighting on pure anger now, with zero structure left. To anyone untrained watching, it looked ferocious. To someone who'd led Marines through actual combat drills, it was amateur hour. I stayed composed, guard tight, never throwing a single strike of my own. I pivoted, slipped his sloppy jabs, and deflected his heavier swings with barely any effort, stepping into the gaps he left open and forcing him to burn through his stamina. By the 90-second mark, he was gasping, his punches slowing and losing power. With 30 seconds on the clock, Brad made his final mistake. Desperate for one clean hit, he wound up a heavy right cross, putting his full weight behind it. I ducked under his arm, closed the gap, and swept his legs out from under him. Before he could recover, I caught his arm, brought him down, and locked him into a tight, controlled shoulder hold. Nothing broke, but the pressure left no room for escape. Brad struggled for a few seconds before it hit him, and in front of his donors, his clients, and his shell-shocked parents, he tapped out. The room stayed dead silent as I released the hold and stood straightening my shirt. Brad lay there, catching his breath, gripping his arm, his pride completely destroyed in front of everyone who mattered to his business. The news camera kept rolling, capturing every second of his sudden fall. My parents snapped out of their shock and rushed the mat. "Claire, stop this right now," my mother said, her voice shaking with humiliation. My father glared at me. "You tricked him. This match doesn't count. He wasn't ready for your military tricks." I didn't bother arguing. I simply picked up the signed contract Brad had waved around on the stage, held it up in front of the news camera so his signature was unmistakable, and walked over to my brother. "A deal's a deal, Brad," I said quietly, offering him a pen. "Sign the transfer now, or by tomorrow morning this footage and your signed challenge go to every station in the city." Brad looked at our parents, then at his stunned clients, realizing he had nothing left to bargain with. Backing out now would destroy whatever credibility he had left. With trembling hands, he signed the property over right there on the mat. I folded the papers, slid them into my pocket, and walked out without a second glance. 6 months later, Dad's old rundown building had become the Vance Community Youth Center, a thriving space offering free fitness programs, tutoring, and mentorship for kids in the neighborhood who needed it most. Meanwhile, Brad's plans for a luxury gym empire fell apart before they ever got off the ground. Once footage of our match spread online, his studio lost more than half its high-paying members, proof that expensive belts and purchased trophies never measure up to real discipline and character. In the end, my brother learned something he'll never forget. Fancy titles don't make a fighter, and you should never underestimate a Marine.